Hey friends, it's MJ from the coaches panel. Round 14 in the rear vision mirror. 1 week of the multi-buys left to go, which means for AFL Fantasy, this is the last time that two things will happen for you in 2024. One, best 18. It's felt like half of the season has been stuck in that, doesn't it? The good news is this is the last time you're going to see blue dots in 2024. And the other is 3 trades available to you. There is a lot to talk about this week on the coaches panel, AFL Fantasy Strategy Roundtable. There is a bunch of players that have come off the buys. There are a bunch that are heading into it, some very relevant names and some moves we've got to talk about. But joining me on the episode, as he has throughout the buys, he's been a bit of a buy round specialist for us. It's Jordox, mate. Nice to see you. Let's not talk about our football team. Let's keep it purely focused on AFL Fantasy. It's the last big week before we return to best 22 and potentially our last big moving week before we position ourselves ranking-wise for the last 10 weeks of the year.
Absolutely, mate. Good to be on again. Don't know what's going on. The whole crew's on the buys at the moment, so happy to be your ringer. And yeah, it should be a good week coming up. The final one, get it out of the way, and then for you and I, we can't see the Crows losing this week, so that's a win.
When your team's on the buy and you're positive and upliftingly looking at it optimistic, it's like, okay, that tells you your season's cooked. So the teams that were off the buy after now spending it were the Suns, the Blues, the Cats, the D's, the Dons, and the Eagles. All the other teams now that have yet to have a buy, they are sitting on the buy this week. They will obviously, like everybody else, return, and we get back to best 22. We alluded to it before. I want to talk positionally through trade, off and on options in a second, but we'll probably get the greatest reality of what our ranks really are, Jordox, after round 16, once we're 1 week past the buy. But for coaches that are really pushing hard, this could be one of the last big ditch pushes you could get to get 1 or 2 premium upgrades, really get that 1 or 2 upgrade moves away from a quote unquote team of premiums. This could be a really important week depending on the moves you make.
And it's the last chance to use 3 trades in a week. So, the strategy, those who have played it well have really utilized that fact, because after this, it'll probably be more a case of 1 up, 1 down for most weeks. The more typical way of trading. So it's your last opportunity to do 3. And, some will have played it different to others. Some will have banked the cash to go bang, bang, bang. Some will be doing a triple upgrade this week. And maybe their rank has dipped in the weeks leading up to this week. And this is the week they make their move. So there's a number of ways to play the game, and there's no one correct way. But certainly, like you said, it all comes out in the wash post buys. And yeah, those that have planned and had luck on their side will be sitting pretty.
It's an interesting week because you got some coaches that are looking to get off players that I think they would have hoped to be able to hold deeper than this bye week. I'm alluding to a Jackson McRae was sitting in that space. Maybe a Will Day's unlucky to be considered in that, but he's someone that sits in around that space that owners are going, oh, for another 100K, I could get myself to a Zach Merritt type, or do I just wait, upgrade around it? This is this interesting dilemma point in the season, isn't it? Where it's, do I keep being aggressive, hope to make up that 100 points this week that I might be able to make as I endeavor to win the hat, or as I endeavor to get a sneaky win in a league? Like, this is where it starts to become that interesting tactical moves where we sometimes joke about it in the content creation space or in a AFL fantasy community on Twitter and places like that, where we say team dependent, but it really truly is this phase where different coaches' temperaments, their risk profile that they're wanting to move in, how confident they are on the players they're looking to move into in the next week or two. It's a fascinating week of fantasy footy aligning for us, Jordox.
It's really hard too, because, the typical way to play it is you're just trying to get all your rookies off field and upgrade those fat and cash cows. But there are some very mediocre players who we would have thought were primos till the end, who are on the bye this week, and I'm sure we'll talk about them shortly. Jack Steele, probably the most common one. And this is the round 2 where we've got a lot of those cows on the bye. Like, I think about all those Collingwood kids, Harvey Harrison, Lockie Sullivan, those who have jumped on a Kruger in recent weeks.
Dowling.
Yeah. All these kids that haven't really fattened. So do you move them on, or do you keep them until they're fattened in a few weeks and move on the guys that are, it's pretty much any primo mid other than a handful at the moment, with the exception of, say, Goulden, Merritt, like all those mid primos at the moment, they're just stinking it up. And maybe it's the tag, that's back in vogue big time. And we say this all the time, the tag is back. It is legitimately back. We are seeing players out of nowhere putting into tag positions and crushing it and actually doing the job. Yeah. So times are tough for the midfield. So the decisions that you make this week, they're really big. And, hopefully we can help guide you through the decision-making process and you can land the right call.
So let's look at the defensive line. Let's help coaches figure their way through a couple of different options that they could look at. I've got about 6 names I want to put up for discussion. You could put up 20, to be honest.
It's a much more fruitful position than the midfield this year, the back line.
It feels like this is where we're trusting our VC scoring a lot more. We're looking still at Sheasel, even though he's not really playing off half back. We're fading a little bit on Dacos, but even on the weekend just gone, he was fine despite getting sat on for most of the game and then positionally reallocated to the forward line. And man, that kid is a handful in any position if you're trying to stop him from playing football. So there's more than 6, but I want to put 6 on the agenda for us. And then Jordox, if you've got some others you either want to talk into or want to add into, there's that. I'm putting a big red flag against this one player, not because I think anybody's trading into him, but I genuinely think we could get a little bit unlucky for some coaches this week. One of the worst things that happens in a buys is a player you are banking on playing not being eligible. You just ask those that, Zach Butters owners, for example, they wake up, they look at their team, and Monday afternoon they see suspended, and they see news like that. Like, these are the kind of moves that really hurt your
That does have a happy ending.
It does have a happy ending.
Yes, for those listening, I'm sure will be aware that he is playing. But yes. You're right. It's absolutely brutal when you've, particularly those who've planned meticulously. Great, in this buy I'll have 20 playing, that's 16 primos, and then there's a 1 week injury or suspension that just makes your just throws your plans into chaos.
Yeah. So the reason I bring that up, and Butters is obviously a good illustration of it, is if I was an Alex Sexton owner, I'd be very, very nervous this week. Now, he's come back into the side and been awesome in this distribution role. He's delivered exactly what I think we saw through the preseason matches and what we'd hoped for. He's now up to 740,000. So he's made some coin. So if you held him or you traded back into him in almost a couple of months ago now, it's been a really great move for you. Got a break even of 39. So arguably still got another, if he plays the next 2 weeks, another 50 to 80K if he keeps churning out the scores. The flag I want to put for coaches that might come Thursday night, it could be this early, is he only got the opportunity when Powell was out with his club enforced suspension. He's back and available to play this week. So how bullish is Damien Hardwick and the selection committee on sending, no, we'll go back to the 2s, build trust in the club, build form and role after not playing football, despite being able to train for that whole period of time, versus do they back Sexton in and keep giving him opportunities? Because he's been okay. I wouldn't say in a pure football sense he's been amazing and electric, but in a fantasy sense he's been great for us. I'm not saying trade out of him. I'm just putting a big red royal flag for coaches before we look at the upgrades. he's someone that if I was an owner, I would have a plan B for my trades this week, because there's a world where he doesn't get picked this week. I don't think it's a massively high percentage, but I can see a world where Sexton doesn't play for us this week and really could throw our Thursday, Friday, rest of the weekend trade plans into a miss and a mess, should we not plan for it. I know it's not a player to talk about trading into, but my goodness me, that could really set some chaos for us if things go wrong.
Go into Thursday night teams with eyes wide open. The thing, my personal view is he'll be fine. Even if Will Power comes in, it would be brutal on Sexton. Just after, he played in the role preseason. He had a crack at it early days. Things weren't working out. They sent him back to the VFL to work on it in that role. He's come back and, I can be seduced by fantasy numbers like the rest of us. But from what I've seen, I think he's looked pretty good in the role for the Suns. I'd be staggered if they did that to him. But you need to be prepared. Like you said, it could happen. And, even if Will Power comes in and Sexton holds, you'd have to think Sexton's ceiling takes a bit of a dip anyway. So you may want to have a plan to get out of him in the next few weeks anyway.
Yeah, fair enough too. Probably one of the surprise picks of the year, just in terms of how good he's been. He was a midfielder eligible only when the AFL fantasy format opened at the start of the year, but come the end of round 6 and the first DPP allocations land, we see a Max Holmes become eligible and available for us. He's now up to 887,000. He's got an average of 99.1, and over his last 9 games, they're all scores of 90 plus, including 5 scores of 100 plus in his last 6. He's no longer just the rebounding defender, though. He's starting to sit into the mix of centre bounce and getting opportunities through there, as really as the Geelong midfield has just been absolutely smashed with injuries this year. I think they were hoping Cam Guthrie was going to play a lot of footy this year. That's been interrupted a few times. Patrick Dangerfield, we know we're in the final days of his footballing career, whether it be this year or next is his final year. I think we might see one more year out of danger after this one, but certainly coming towards the end. He's shown at least a little bit of ceiling, Jordox. That was my only real concern of him. We've started to see some 110, 120 plus scores over the last 5-6 weeks. And you alluded to it right at the top of the episode, where we're talking about these midfield premiums that we can't really trust and are yo-yoing in scores. How do you feel about paying almost 900,000 for a guy that really over the last 9 games feels pretty bulletproof, even if his ceiling is not as often as we'd like it? What's your take on a Max Holmes as an upgrade option this week?
I love the pick. I'm so glad he's on your list, and I'm so glad we get to talk about him. He is the exact guy. If you are trying to find a way into the top 1,000, top 2,000, top 100, he is the exact sort of guy you should look at. His consistency has floored me. I mean, I looked at him last week just randomly. I didn't realize the consistency was there with him. Like you said, the ceiling's not quite there, but he is a great sort of pick if you're trying to attack the second half of the year. If you're much further up the ranks or you're sitting pretty in your leagues, maybe you can play a bit more defensive and get a more commonly owned guy. But I love the pick. 7% ownership, I think it was roughly. And, he's not cheap. It's not like he's a bargain. But geez, you're paying for consistency, and I think I like that pick a lot.
A couple other names we could throw in the mix there if you're trying to do things on a bit of a budget. Still at $706,000, you've got a Christian Salem. His last month since coming back into the side from injury, he's looked really, really good. Some tons in there, some 90-plus scores. And I think the other interesting piece for prospective owners or current owners that might have planned to trade him at the buy but have since held him is the absence of Clayton Oliver does open up that midfield. And we saw early in the season through preseason, and I think it was even as early as opening round, Christian playing at centre bounce, using his skill and poise and adding tackles to his game, which he's not been historically noticed for. So it feels like I'm running an injury gauntlet with Christian, and I'm happy to admit that. But if cash is something that you are lacking in significantly, and you think he might be one of the ones that could gain some of that midfield ball, whether that again be through centre bounce attendance or just he plays a little bit higher up and they use him as the distributor. I think there could be worse options at the $706,000 if you're looking for a little bit of upside, albeit with a little bit of risk.
He's really surprised me this year in the role. I didn't really think. I thought he was a good starting option, start of the year, make a bit of cash and move him on. I think most did that. But since he's come back in that role, where you're right, it's a bit of midfield, a bit of half back, he has looked good. His tackling's been good. And with the Petrarca injury, Melbourne's midfield is sort of, I don't know who else they're missing because they've still got Jack Viney, and still got Clayton Oliver, but it's just not ticking the way it has in previous years. I think at 700K, pretty much, he's a definite option for the run home. And look, the injury risk, it's such a funny thing. We've talked about Zorko all year, and I hope I'm not putting the moz on him this week, but he's got through the year pretty much so far. And look, we're in the back end of the year now. We've cleared the buys. Don't get too caught up on injury-prone guys now, because realistically, they just have to give you a good month, 6 weeks to do their job. And a guy like Salem could make you cash, and then you move him on anyway. So, he's an option, someone to keep an eye on as well.
I want to put three more names out there, all coming off the bye. And then if you've got either some thoughts on them or some other players you wanted to put in the mix for the defensive line, happy to hear it. First up, you can have a Liam Duggan at 835K between round 2 to 12. He's got 6 scores of 100 plus, 3 additional 90 plus scores. However, it's probably a little sour taste in some coaches or some trading options with that 60s score that he delivered just before the bye. So that might turn a few people off him. But if uniqueness and you just want to pick a West Coast Eagle, arguably he's probably the only one you're really doing with any sort of confidence. And Nick Newman, 3% owned. His last 5, he's going at 99, 860 odd, 870K. I know a lot of coaches will probably prefer to just go up that little bit more to a Holmes if they're spending that much, but he's a name that's in the mix. And then somebody that probably not getting as much love as they should in this format of the game. In Supercoach, a lot of coaches looking at him this week. And we'll talk about that inside 24 hours on the Supercoach Strategy Roundtable with Pig Mentality joining us for that one. So make sure you check that out when it drops inside the next 24 hours or so. I'm talking about Ridley from the Bombers. His 3-game average of 105.7, 5% owned. He's just a scratch over 800K. He's certainly got that boosted by that return to AFL game from injury, where that was the ceiling. But we've said a number of times, Jordox, over the past few years, some thought it was when Jake the Bull Kelly was coming into the team, but with Harry Mackay's brother, Ben, now landing at the club. That's a bit harsh to say that. Refer to him through his twin, not his own identity. But with Ben coming to the club, it's like he doesn't have to play that lockdown role. He's free to intercept like we saw in the 2020 season. And he can score it. He's unique and he's relatively cheap. Any of those 3 appealing to you?
I love Ridley. The price is a little bit spicy for, I guess the risk within that role, because as you said, Mackay's there now and he should be free to intercept. The problem with Ridley is he's a very good interceptor, but he's also a very good defender. So they might come up against a side that has that extra tall and he has to do it. Mason Redman, at time of recording, is ready to go, and you would think he's a sort of player that will go straight back in. So that's a watch. But I like Witherden. Duggan, he's actually under a cloud as well for this week. Mm-hmm. So assuming he gets through. And I love Nick Newman, just that ceiling. And he can end a year with 6 to 8 weeks. That could really, make your side come home with wet sail. The only one I'll throw in, when you said to throw one in, I was going to throw in the Holmes pick, but you've nailed it, so that's great. I wouldn't discount Elliot Yeo. I know it's Yeo and the body, and we all know these things, but 741K, he's still their main man, even when Harley Reid returns. That's crazy. Tim Kelly is going to miss. There is a cloud around Duggan. Dom Sheed's going to miss this week. Not that Dom Sheed's been a big player this year for the Eagles, but he's just very much the man, Yo. And if he can come home strong, he's at a very good price, 740, I think it was. So they're probably the only ones. If you want to really, out of the box type, I love a Trent Rivers. He's priced around 630 maybe. Just with the changes with Petrarca out, maybe Salem, does solidify that midfield role. Just a bit more responsibility for Rivers, and he can pinch it through the guts as well. So he scored a ton last week. No, he had the bye. I did that
the
last
week prior.
Pod too. His last game, he scored a ton. Apart from that, he'd been relatively average, but it's in the 600 bracket. One to keep an eye on.
Yeah, fair enough too. Let's move into the midfield. One of the most popular starting squad selections for us, that I think for the most part has worked really, really well, is a Jack Steele. However, his last 5 weeks, it feels like a regression to the Steele of 2023. It's still priced at 852K, so there's still some cash sitting on top of him, and relatively easy to not just go up to almost anyone, but you can actually go down to some players that have got proven history of 105, 110 plus scoring. I'm alluding to guys like Rosie and Green, for example. They don't have the greatest recent history. I understand that. And you can make like 100 plus K off a move like that. Break even of 129, gone at 9 in his last 5. Probably sits in that same category we alluded to earlier, doesn't it, Jordox, which is, I think ideally coaches have wanted to just run him through to the rest of the season, but now get to the bye and have a real decision to make of, do I upgrade often around these cows? And do I get a Freege? Do I get a Sullivan? Do I get a McAuliffe? And do I only get the one upgrade? Or do I just allow one of them to sit a little bit longer? And no, I can do 2 premium maneuvers by really one of them being a sideways move. You're sitting quite high in the ranks. You're really pushing hard for a hat in 2024. I know you don't often like to give away too much. Are you leaning towards trading it?
Actually, just on that, last week, I listened back and you mentioned I was 200. I do have to correct it. That was in DP. So I'm top 2,000 in AF. So
okay. The hat close enough.
The hat might not be there, but I am still proud of the season. It's going well. So yeah, Jack Steele. Look, I've been worried about him for a while. His score build is a little bit sporadic. It's hard to sort of, know where his points are going to come from. He's not accumulating the footy. You can put a line through that. He's just not. His last game where he went over 20 touches what's that, round 11, where he did have north of 30, but I'm looking at all these games. He's struggling to get to 20 touches in a lot of games. So Jack Steele doesn't always have to get touches. That's fine because he'll tackle his way to a good score. His tackles have been pretty solid. There's been some 15s and 13s, so that's big. But there aren't many weeks where he has good numbers in the tackle column and good numbers in the marks column. So he might have 15 tackles like he did in round 12. He took no marks that week. Yeah. Then you go, okay, the week before he took 10 marks. That's great. Only laid 2 tackles. So his scoring is all over the place. And then, the worst thing about his last game was he was getting the tag from Jared Berry, which is fine because there's a tag in every game now, it feels. But then they moved him to like a half forward type role to tag Zorko. So I think he missed out on any CBAs in the final quarter of that game. Oh, it's just not something you want at this point of the year to ride home, a player in that sort of form. So I'm not saying get him out, he's going to ruin your year. For all we know, the week off will freshen him up and we'll see a much better version of him this week and beyond. But if you can turn him into a similar player, like you said before, there are a number of guys, that are much cheaper, a Tom Green, even a Took Miller, who are scoring comparatively, but you can bank 50K or 60K to then spend that elsewhere. I think you have to look at it.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. Personally, I'm a big believer in trade. It's different if it was one of the other more limited trade formats, but to me, a guy in that type of form who's got this price point, to me, with the amount of value that we have this week and really for the next 2 to 3 weeks, I'm a big believer in just trade. And if you really want to get back into him, you can see next week he's got that 129 break even. So it's not moving too far. Even if he has a blinder, you can wait the next week after that still. So really, you can look at it as a round 18 upgrade if you want to go back there again.
Well,
so I'm a
looking
big
at the
trade out guy.
matchups, he comes back after the bye, plays Port and then Sydney. If he can score against those two,
he's back there.
Then jump on for round 18 when he plays the Crows.
Yeah, well, that's where his points are going to come from. Look, there's a couple of players I want to ask you about, but I've really only got the 3 options that I want to put on the table that are players that are coming off the bye. Zach Merritt feels like one of the most popular trades this week, a 109.5 average, really high ownership, and was one of the best premium midfielders to start with. Every single year, it feels like there's pretty much only one of the top end midfielders that it's justified to start and spend big dollars on. You could probably argue that Merritt's that guy from 2024. His last 5's not been as great, not averaging the ton in the last 5, but he's got a West Coast matchup. You've mentioned how many are out this week. And for basically $40,000, you can go from a steal into a Merritt, and he does feel relatively bulletproof, doesn't he? Even when a tag comes his way, it absolutely clips his ceiling like it does everyone else, but he's got that ability to find himself in the defensive half through the forward half. And just the way that the Bombers move and use the ball, that they will always find a way to bring him into the game through transition, scoring, handballs, receives, and a bunch of other things. I'll get to the other 2 in a moment, but this is one of the most popular upgrade moves for non-owners this week. And while he's coming in off cooling form, he always does give us this little glimpse in a year, doesn't he, Jordox, where a couple of weeks come, he drops a little bit of value, and then some big games are coming. Is this now the time it's like almost now or never for Zach Merritt?
Yeah, we don't need to go into great detail about Merritt. He's one of the most consistent, most talked about, most owned players of the last 5-6 years. And every year, you're right, he has this little dip where his price drops and we can all get him for a bargain. And that time is now. His last game, he was worn like a glove by Chincotta in the Carlton game. And much like Windhager, the tagging that those players are doing is, the umpires will be looking. It's absolutely sit in your pocket, don't let you breathe. And he fought his way to 100. It was a very impressive ton. The interesting and almost ominous thing about Merritt is every year he has a dip, and every year he will have at least one game where he goes and knocks the lights out. Now, so far this year, his best score has been a 135, which is great. I'm not saying that's a bad top score. He's got a 150 in him between now and the end of the year. I don't know when it'll be, but this week again, this week against the Eagles
could be
at Marvel could very well be it. So it doesn't need to be much said about him. He's under 900K. If you can get him, I think most will be doing that this week.
Yeah, and even if it's not just for the quote unquote value he presents, it's the fact that you can nullify a guy that if you don't own him yet, that's got the capacity to go 110, not just for the season, he's basically doing this, but 115, 120 till the end of the year. I understand why he's popular as a trading option this week, and understandably so. Sam Walsh sits in that same category. 931K going at 110 this year. Got a good matchup this week on paper based on the DFS Australia data. playing the Geelong midfield, which feels like a gravy matchup for us, and definitely something you could, depending on where you're putting your VC or Cs this week, he should certainly be in considerations for that. A higher ownership than I think most people would tend to think, especially after an interrupted preseason and coming into the year late. But a quarter of the comp are on Sam Walsh at the moment. So he's got really, really high ownership. So if you're looking for bang out of the gate, good matchup that history says he should score well against, again, I understand Walsh. And then if you're just playing for fun, he's volatile as anything, this guy. He's under 900K, so it's not cheap. He's up at 878,000. But if you're like, MJ, I just want a guy that I could jag a couple of 150 games out of this year. Noah Anderson is one of the most fun players to own. If you are competing for a hat, I'm not advocating to go for Noah Anderson. This is purely for someone that is like, I just want to have some fun and some hits and some giggles. A team that probably should be making finals this year based on what that fixture looks like and how congested it is through that teams fitting the bottom part of the finals. I think everybody within AFL land, it certainly has an expectation that the things are falling the Gold Coast's way a little bit. It's not a pick that you feel safe in because he's as likely to give you a 60 as he is a 150. I'll put it that way. But yeah, if you're just having a little bit of fun, your year is gone, and you just want to own players that are enjoyable to watch, Noah fits that category for me. He's not for everybody. I'm not telling you to go nuts for it. But if you just want a ceiling player, Noah could be a guy.
And strangely, they tagged Took Miller in the last game with devastating effect for Took Miller owners. So there's a bit of a blueprint there for the opposition of the Suns that maybe you don't have to tag a Noah Anderson. But I like the idea as a bit of fun, but I reckon you're underplaying it. I actually think he could be a guy that takes someone really far in the back end of the year, because those 60s that are in his makeup, unfortunately, he's only 23, so he'll get to a point where he lifts those basement scores. But for the here and right now, I could see him going on a pretty strong tear for the rest of the year. If, like you said, the Gold Coast can continue and push for finals, he's just a little bit expensive for the risk. So that's probably where it is just more of a fun pick at this point anyway.
There's one more guy I want to put on the radar as a trade conversation. I don't know if you've got somebody else you want to throw in the mix. Then there's one more that I want to flag for next week and just get in nice and early. But the break-evens would tell you Connor Rosie is not a trade this week. He's got a break-even of 130, I believe it is. Just a touch over 700,000, like absolutely wild to think that after the first 4 or 5 weeks of the year, he was pushing $1 million and was looking at 110 mid, and a little bit of PTSD for owners at the start of the year, which I was included in that conversation. His descent over the past 6 weeks may or may not summarize your AFL fantasy season. Looked okay on the weekend, was a tough matchup. No Port Adelaide player through the midfield got a ton. It was Houston and Farrell, and that was it. So they're rebounders and run and carry players off the back line. Everything about playing the break-evens would say, wait the week. The Lions matchup isn't super easy either, although I'm fully expecting Berry to go to Butters, who's now cleared to play. What's your take? Do you feel comfortable enough going more for the banking the score and not really worrying about the value or the potential price change? Where do you sit in that space?
Yeah, probably I can't remember which one you said, whether it was latter or the former. I'll just say what I think. I think at the price he is, don't stress too much about the break even. Like, how much cheaper, if you've targeted him, it's someone you want to get, how much cheaper does he have to go? He's 712K. If you're really going to wait one more week just for the money, I think it's a little bit, I think you're playing a risk there, because other things will pop up in the next 7 days, the next round. However, if it's more a case of, I'd love the price, I love what he did at the start of the year, I wanted to see more, maybe I'll have another look. That's fine.
Yeah.
I will say, though, this is the sort of pick that if you wait until what's he got to hit against the Lions for the masses to sort of say, whoa, and we all jump on.
Oh,
A
any
90?
triple figure score and the masses will flood.
95 plus, let's say. Then everyone jumps on, and possibly you don't have the ability to do it next week. We're back to 2 trades a week. There's a lot going on. Who knows what could pop up? If this guy's in your plans for the rest of the year, I reckon you do it this week. Forget that they'll drop money. Forget that you need to see another ton before you jump on. If you're going to do it, I think this is the week, because you want to be a game ahead of everyone, a week ahead of everyone. And if it doesn't work and he sucks and he scores 80, well, first of all, pretty much all the midfielders are doing that anyway. And second of all, it cost you 700K. That's fine.
Yeah,
move on.
There's no risk.
Don't worry about it. So it's a bit like the Oliver move, 6-7 weeks ago, which has been pretty disappointing for most. But as the years rolled on, what did you lose in that?
Nothing.
Not much. You didn't pay for much. And he's like, I don't want to go on about the midfielders at the moment, but Oliver's scoring, as underwhelming as it is for him, it's kind of on par like with a Tom Green, who everyone's jumping on. So that's how you look at it.
Fair enough. There's one midfielder I want to flag for a future trade, but before we hit that one, is there any players that you're like, MJ, let's not leave the midfield without giving some flowers and some attention to another mid?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, Clayton Oliver, he's still dirt cheap. And yes, he's been underwhelming. And yes, he's probably something you do want to see something. But with Petrarca out, which we've said a few times already, things could shift. And, I think we talked about him last week, Oliver, whether to trade him out. And the argument I put up for holding is to give him this week to build his fitness, to freshen up and work on his positioning around the ground. Is he running to the right spots? Is he getting under Max Gawn the way he used to? If they've worked on that, he could imagine Oliver comes out and smashes it for the last 8 weeks. Like, what a slam dunk pick that would be.
Every chance.
And then the other one in a similar mold, but a bit more money. Oh, actually, it's pretty similar. 784 is Took Miller, another guy who just hasn't got going this year. And his last appearance was a 47 when he was strangled mercilessly by Windtaker. But apart from that, his scoring has been just about what most mids are doing, with the exception of your superstars in Goulden, Merritt, Walsh.
Yeah.
So Took Miller in the back end of the year. So Noah Anderson, he's a captain of the club. They're charging for their first finals appearance. He could be a really good pick as well.
Yeah, some good names in there.
Yeah, some very big names that in previous years you'd say, he's 750K. Where do I sign? But it's been a strange old year.
Yes, it has. We need to move to the forwards and the rucks before we wrap up the episode. But if I was giving coaches any advice for their midfield, I would say this. There is one midfielder that I would be saving room for, and I would be aggressively going for next week. Got an average of 112 in his last 5. He's got history of going not just 110 for a season, but there was a point in 2023 where he was going 120 and was the number 1 scorer. His ownership is super low due to absence and injury. He's at 926K. And the reason I love him is he will never, ever, 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 ever get a tag. I'm alluding to Tim Taranto. He is a very typical old school AFL fantasy gun in the Rockcliffe era, in the Swan era. These guys that are high possession winners, high tank runners, endurance athletes that can get around the ground, both for uncontested possessions, uncontested marks, get around and tackle, and even sneak forward and kick goals. If you're spending over 900K for any midfielder next week, I don't care who it is. To me, the best prospect for the rest of the year that is bulletproof from a tag, to me, is Tim Taranto. And if I'm spending over 900K on anyone, gee whiz, I need and want it to work. That Richmond run is good. The injury risk, well, sure. Okay, whatever. He's had one injury in 18 months as a Tiger. I'm fine with that. To me, I think there's a world where he's the number one midfielder from round 16 to the end of the season. I'm really comfortable with that. Everything's aligning for me to just give this guy the keys to your AFL fantasy midfield. Cheap compared to what you should be. 110 history in his last 5, let alone what he can do. Can't get tagged when you've got a Bolton and a Dusty rolling through that midfield. You're not going to give them the disrespect and put it on a Timmy Taranto, who, as an efficient ball user, is not his number one skill set. My goodness me, I'm saving room and aggressively making room for Tim Taranto from next week.
Can't argue with any of that other than the tag part. I just think if he's got 20 touches at halftime, it could happen just because everyone's tagging everyone. But everything else you said is spot on. It's such a shame he's got the bye this week.
Yep.
And I like to find things like, sometimes they talk about the contract year, players, find an extra leg. I don't know this guy, but I would say there's a fire in his belly with all this talk about Richmond have sold their future. They've invested way too much in him and Hopper, yada, yada, yada. I think there's a fire in his belly to just say to everyone, hey, those 7 years will be worth every dollar spent. And in the 2 games since he's returned, and I talk about specifically the Adelaide game, that was the one I watched him closely. Yeah, he's going to finish like a steam train.
Yeah, I think so too. The forward line, I think if you don't own one of Zorko, Heaney or Flanders, that's on you at this point. You've had multiple opportunities to get there. Heaney was a real clear starting squad selection, but I understand the hesitancy for some around not picking him. Zorko, his early buy made him difficult to get to. And then Flanders, probably you could put him in that same consideration too. But now, up until the end of last week, where we could have traded into Zorko at an exorbitant price, but I think we'd be happy enough. So history would say you get a 120 as your vice captain or a trade-in option. You're pretty happy with that through there. But if you don't own any of those 3, obviously they're the 3 best options rolling through the forward lines. We're not going to talk about them now because if you don't have them yet, I said it, and it's not to be mean. It's just that's on you now. You've had multiple avenues to get there through the season after the bye, plan for it. And if you're not there yet, that's okay. But somehow you've just not allowed yourself to get into those 3. To me, there's probably 2, but really only one that I'm really bullish on. I've called a little bit on Simpkin just with the hamstring or the calf, like one of those soft tissue injuries he's got. I'm always a little bit concerned trading into a guy that it's like, he's missed a week. We'll wait and see. So wait and see till teams, but I wouldn't talk anybody out of it, but I always have a little bit of hesitancy, but understand why there's a lot of love. And one of those just incredibly frustrating moves for coaches last week that probably found themselves going, I'm going for Toby Green now. As the
it'll forever be remembered as the Sunday Simpkin scramble.
The good thing, if you did go into a Toby Green type, that was a 1 goal 5. He could have given you a 120 and it would have been a genius move.
Just on that, I mean, we don't have to go into the craziness that was Sunday, 12 o'clock to 1 o'clock Melbourne time. But there are some coaches who were stuck or caught living their lives, as we all should be doing.
Yeah.
Some of us don't, but we should be doing on a Sunday, and got stuck with him. A lot of us who changed that trade got in a guy that didn't even make our 22, our best 18 rather, and he actually might be back this week, Simpkin.
Yeah.
So you've actually got an extra in. So
quite possibly
fortune may actually favour those who were busy last Sunday. Digressing from the point.
No, I think that's a very optimistic lens to look through, but I think it's a very, very reasonable and fair shout. I'm not a big fan of Matt Kennedy. And the reason being is when Chera's in the side, he gets squeezed away from the football and really struggles to score. When Chera's out of the side, or one of Hewitt, Cripps, or Walsher, okay, he's back in the mids and he can score, but Chera's back as early as next week. So to me, trading into him means you're trading into a hoped injury in the Carlton midfield. I don't like playing fantasy football that way.
And anyone that hits a sub 40 from a full game and there's no real explanation, you can just put a line through them. Just don't do it to yourself.
Yeah. I think outside of the mega 3 forwards, the one that people might be considering this week is a Jai Caldwell in at 755K. He's gone at 90 in his last 5. Look, it's not an amazing pick, but that pretty much sums up our forward lines outside of that top 3 this year, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. It's about 120K off a Tom Powell type who feels like he's lost that midfield role now, and he'll go 70s, which is okay. But if you can make up 15-ish points per game or points per week, then it might work out okay for you in the end. I don't know if it's a high trade priority because we've still got a number of forwards playing for us this week. Fisher's maybe looped forward for people. Sexton could be back and a number of other prospects through there. So personally, I'd probably rather look at trading into an Oliver or a Rosie who are cheaper or similar price points. But if you're desperate for a forward and you've already got the big 3, gosh, he's probably really the only one coaches would feel confident having for a couple of weeks. And with Darcy Parish still out for the next month, you'd feel like he's got some midfield time pretty securely rolling for him.
Yeah, I like the Caldwell pick. And it is slim pickings. It has been all year, let's be honest. I really like Isaac Rankin. He's on the bye this week, so it's not really, but we're just looking for anyone for the run home. Probably a flag, a guy I would put against a Taylor Adams, who finally showed something on the weekend.
Yeah,
with his first, I believe his first ton as a Swan. Yep. But Callum Mills, and we could have talked this in the context of the midfield, and even in the context of those who don't have a Heaney. Would you now get onto a Heaney with Mills just around the corner? I don't think Heaney will be turning into a forward pocket anytime soon, but no. Mills will be back, and I think for that reason you could, don't get sucked into a Taylor Adams. He had a good weekend, a good score on the weekend, but that's it. The other one that I keep thinking about, it's out there, and it's probably one that
I like that as a start, Jordox. I like that.
Yeah, well, I touched on him at the end of last week, but just Cozzy Pickett, just a 6-week run from him. At 590K with that, I feel like we've talked about the Petrarca injury 5 times on this pod, but the Melbourne players, there's a fair bit going on there. So look for who's going to get the opportunity and see what you can do with it. But apart from that, I really do just come back to Simpkin. I just think if he plays everything we thought about him, 7 days ago, we still think about him. We knew he was injury prone. He just, I think, and just on that quickly, I'm not sure he was injured. I mean, they did scan his hammy and they found something, but I think they're going to be ultra cautious with a guy like that. So I guess my point is, if he's named up and in this week, he's fit and ready to go. So I think Simpkins probably the pick this week out of everyone.
There you go. It tells you what you think of the forwards then, really, doesn't it? The Rucks, we've got to talk about Max Gawn. I think that's really what it is. I do want to touch on Grundy for a little bit as well, but there's not too many players that you could argue definitively if you didn't have them in your starting squad or over the first 8 weeks of the year, they were almost single-handedly a significant reason why you're not in the ranking space you wanted to, and or you needed multitudes of variables to all work your way to get you there. So if you're without Gawn at the moment having a good season, you're probably in the more minority, and you've required a lot of other variables to kind of counterbalance against that. Yes, it was a popular pick for a lot of different reasons. He was a popular fade. Also because there was a lot of great ruck options. So I could argue myself on both sides of these cases for coaches with Gawn up at $1 million, one of the most expensive players now in the game, and has been for a lot of the season now. For the non-owners, do they just swallow their pride, Jordox, and go, I'm probably overpaying for him? Because anytime you pay $1 million, the risk profile is really high. Like, arguably, it's at the highest because you need them to perform at that max performance. And if they don't, you've overpaid and it's gone a little bit south for you. Do you just bite the bullet and go, I'm just going to neutralize him. I'm sick of him scoring against me and hating watching Melbourne. And do you just bite the bullet, or do you keep thinking, I've already gone half the season without him. My year's kind of cooked anyway to some degree. Stuff it. I'll just keep going against him. What's your gut reaction?
Gawn has just been incredible. And, you know, the advantage of Gawn is the amount of times he's given you a ceiling score that if you viced or captained, you know, it's just a double whammy for those who don't have him.
Yeah.
But, you know, shut up, Jordan. For those who don't have him, they know that. Can you get him at this point in the year? The simple answer is yes, of course. I guess the big if and but around it is, who are you trading out? If you have got a Marshall or an English right now, you would be so tempted, because to get to Gawn, it's not that much coin. You know, for Marshall, it's 40, 50K. For English, it's 100K, and they're on the buy. So I get why you'd be looking at that. Then if you've got Grundy or Cherry or one of those guys, I couldn't find an argument to go from them to Gawn, because they're not on the buy and their scoring at the moment is incredible. So I guess it's Marshall, with the fact that Campbell was in last week and he's had some up and down scores. You could do it. And in English, we've got Sam Darcy to return. There's just enough question marks around those two that I think you could do it. You could just say, this will probably kill me to see Marshall then drop his 150 on my head, which has been such a frustrating year in the Rucks for those who have jumped between the two. But I guess the simpler answer is, of course, you could do it. And I'd almost go as far as saying me to do it. It depends how the rest of your side looks.
Of course.
But you want to have Gawn for the rest of the year. If you can make it happen, and the rest of your side's pretty swish, I think you can.
Yeah. The reality is, if you're looking at trading off from one of those two bigger names that you mentioned, it's not just what does Marshall versus Gawn do in English for the rest of the year. You're actually having an extra week of Gawn compared to those two. So depending on what Gawn delivers for you this week and the 50 to 100K it costs you this trade, it's already got a points head start. I think the only genuine reason you're going off Gawn, outside of being stubborn, and it's perfectly fine to be stubborn and play the game your way, is you genuinely think that Melbourne put the Q in the rack now. With no Christian Petrarca, what is the point of rolling out their A-grade superstar to just be banged and crashed, solo rucked every single week? And do they try to experiment with a few more things this year? I don't think Melbourne are at that point, nor should they be. Still very much competing in finals. But if you're not getting him now, for whatever variable reason, maybe it's because you've got a Jackson or you've mentioned those other two, you're like, nah, it's not worth the trade. I can make up the points with getting off of a Frege and a Sullivan, or moving off a Steele, or however you want to get that. That's totally fine. But if you're not getting into Gawn now, in 3 to 4 weeks' time, the risk of trading him in and Melbourne experimenting is going to get higher if their season is out of whack. So I'm with you. It might not be a move for everybody this week to go a English or a Marshall up and on to Gawn, but geez, there's a guy that's taken a season away from you if you're not owning him, and that move could be there. Grundy's a play. If you got 100K cheaper, I don't know if I'd do it from English or Marshall. It's probably for those still stuck on the ruck merry-go-round, trying to get out of the Jordan Sweet disaster.
There'd be coaches, for whatever reason, with a Luke Jackson at R2. It's just that's how it's fallen, you know. So if you're in that position, yeah, there's some
Grundy
really
sits then.
Grundy. You got Cherry, who I think is he's just been incredible as well. And I mentioned this next one, and I'm being a touch facetious, but I genuinely believe we could see Sweet come in for Soldo this week. So at 541k, could I tempt you one more time? That's the last Sweet joke for the year, I promise.
All right, fair enough. Look, Kieran Briggs is another, if you really want to run a gauntlet in terms of a guy that could go 95 plus. But again, we're talking about a very narrow field of coach they're really stuck in a situation they don't want to be through probably no fault of their own.
After the buys, I promise you, Riley O'Brien will be back in for the Crows. So if you want to go,
true.
We will not see Strawny again.
Poor fella. No, I doubt that very, very much. So, hey, mate, it's been an absolute pleasure chatting with you about all of these players and prospects and moves and things we could consider heading into this final week of the buys. As always, mate, an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.
Anytime, mate. Good luck, everyone.
If you want to go and check out the video episode of this podcast, you can go and watch them on YouTube. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, make sure you do it. And if you're watching this episode on YouTube, what are the trades you're making this week? Could you comment below and let us know? I'd love to see the trades you make and get involved with the discussion happening there. And make sure you've turned notifications on, so as soon as an episode goes live, you find out straight away from us. If you listen to this as an audio podcast, whether it be through Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, YouTube Music, wherever it absolutely is, make sure you've followed and given a 5-star rating. And if you'd love extra content from us that's not readily available to everybody else, but it is for our Patreons, then for just a few dollars a month, you can gain access to a bunch of incredible rewards. There's a cheap tier that's just a couple of bucks a month at our cash cow level, right through up to, I think it's $10 a month for our premiums. Depending on the tier you get, there is a bunch of different rewards, content access, and a ton of other stuff that rolls not just through the season, but during the off season and pre-season propers for you as well. So definitely worth subscribing, finding what's there. Some Keeper League content is going to start dropping very, very soon from Kane and myself. Yes, our super coach and AFL Fantasy Keeper League expert Kane. It's been a bit busy this year, but he'll be around for some keeper content. That if you join our Patreon, if you're up at that top tier level, just for a minute, at that premium level, you get 4 podcasts from us a week. The 2 that are public and free and available, the AFL Fantasy and Supercoach Roundtables, but you get 4 a week from us. And so there's 2 hidden behind the paywall that you can get. So if you just want to keep getting all the Coaches Panel content you can go and check that out. Hey, good luck in your final week of the buys. I hope they go well for you. I hope your trades are Simpkin pain-free, that your vice captain goes as well as Dane Zorko did on the weekend. And your cash cows, if you've still got a couple left, well, they do better than a couple of them that did for us last week. Good luck. And until we chat to you in a week's time or in 24 hours for the Supercoach Strategy Roundtable, from all of us here at the Coaches Panel, good luck. We'll chat to you soon.